As we go to the second Sunday of Easter, we run into something in the Acts of the Apostles that a number of fairly shallow commentators have suggested that it teaches Christians to be communists. So let me give you some reflections from a theologian and writer. And I got a lot of this from a Catholic priest of my acquaintance several years ago. Now, here's the passage. It's Acts 4:32 to 35. And it talks about the early church devoting themselves to the teaching of the apostles, the communal life, the breaking of bread, the Eucharist, and the prayers, which would very likely be going to the temple and praying what we call the divine office now. It says that awe, reverence came upon everyone, and signs and wonders were done through them, miracles, like Jesus did. Then it says, all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their property and possessions and divide them among all according to each one's need. So they liquidated property, and then everybody was equal. They devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple area, and that's where they would pray and probably have teaching. They had the breaking of bread, the Eucharist, in the home church, and they ate meals with exultation and sincerity of heart, praised God, and enjoyed favor with all the people, and recruited and brought people into their community. Well, that just sounds ideal. And indeed, it is seen as ideal here. But that sentence in the middle of it, that is the basis for Catholics and other Christians who say that we should be communists, socialists. Well, let's look at that. Let's particularly see what follows. An example of good behavior is given by Barnabas, Joseph, who eventually became a collaborator with St. Paul. He's called Son of Encouragement. This is the rosy picture continues here. And he said that he was a Levite, so he probably was a cantor in the temple. He came from Cyprus, and he had a field probably there, and he sold it. He brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So this became part of the community's property, this money. So that's the good news from Barnabas. This is the example of good behavior. But that's not all. Right on top of this, in Acts 5, 1 through 11, we see the story of Ananias and Sapphira, an example of bad intentions bearing bad fruit. They sold some property, but kept back some of the proceeds, brought a part of it, laid at the apostles' feet, and declared it to be the entire proceeds. Well, Peter then says, how have you contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God. And then Ananias dropped dead. His wife came and confirmed what Ananias had said in terms of the purchase money. And she dropped dead. They were taken out. And it says, great fear came upon all who heard of it. What does this mean? Why did these people die? Probably of a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. But they dropped dead at Peter's feet. It looks like they were punished for not giving everything to the church. But that can't be it. And we'll see the history of the church in the first century moved on, and they stopped practicing this communist type of economics. What was it that caused their death, if you will? And the answer is they lied to God. They lied to God. It has very little to do with the actual proceeds of the sale. Now let's see if there are biblical texts that suggest the sharing of all things in common really was a bad idea. That's not what Jesus intended when he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Well, if you look at Romans 15, you see that he's telling the Romans that he's going to Jerusalem with aid for the saints. Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints. What saints? The ones at Jerusalem, specifically. So he's in Greece, probably in Corinth, and he's got this money, and he's going back to Rome with that money for the Jerusalem poor. If you see 1 Corinthians 16, 1-3, where he's writing to the Corinthians, and he also repeats this exhortation in 2 Corinthians, and makes reference to collecting for the poor in Jerusalem in the letter to the Galatians. And you see here that he tells the Corinthians every week when they get together at what we would call the Mass, they're to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that the contributions need not be thrown together in a basket by them when he arrives there. In other words, they're going to put these contributions together, and he'll take them, here we go again, to Jerusalem. So he seems to have spent some time doing this. What do the texts imply? Well, to me, and I got this from another priest, we can infer that the community did practice a kind of communal ownership, call it communism if you will, but it certainly was a Marxist communism, in the first months or years. In the euphoric state they had after the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and this huge increase in their numbers. What they were doing was eating up their capital. They were making firewood out of the house, if you will, to keep warm. Then the Jerusalem church, which was simultaneously under tremendous persecution, we can see that Herod killed James, for instance, and the Jewish authorities were constantly persecuting. I mean, that's how we come up with St. Paul on his path to Damascus to arrest and have murdered Christians there. Well, the Jerusalem church was strained because they were bankrupt. Paul then spent a great deal of time in the years of his ministry raising money from the other churches in Greece and in Asia Minor and Rome to give to the poor Jerusalem church. The Jerusalem church was not the center of the Christian world after the early years. There's no evidence that any of Paul's churches then ever tried this experiment in communal ownership again. And today, the church's ordinary magisterium preaches no Catholic, no true Catholic, no authentic Catholic can be an authentic socialist. And that came in Quadragesimo Anno in 1931. It's repeated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. If you want to know more, I've given you a link here to Catholic Answers, and they have a treatment of Catholicism and socialism.